It was the summer of 1893. Queen Victoria was on the throne, and the British Empire was at the peak of its power. A huge part of that power was the Royal Navy. It was the greatest naval force the world had ever seen. Its ships sailed every ocean, protecting trade routes and projecting British strength. And one of the men in charge of this mighty fleet was Vice Admiral Sir George Tryon. He was a proper old sea dog, a veteran of the Crimean War. He was known for his intelligence, his confidence, and his sometimes rather unconventional ideas about naval maneuvers. He was a man who liked to do things his own way. He was a bit of a maverick, and people respected him for it. Admiral Tryon was in command of the Mediterranean Squadron. This was one of the most prestigious posts in the entire Royal Navy. He flew his flag from the magnificent HMS Victoria. Now, this wasn't just any old ship. The Victoria was a brand new battleship, a real beast. She was the pride of the fleet, one of the most advanced warships afloat. She was over 100 meters long and weighed more than 10,000 tons. Her main guns were enormous, housed in a massive forward turret. She was a floating fortress, a symbol of industrial might. To be in command of her and the whole squadron was a sign that you were at the very top of your game. The Admiral was famous for inventing complicated and daring maneuvers for his ships. He wanted to test his captains and crews to keep them sharp. He believed the Navy had become a bit too reliant on following signals from a book. He wanted his officers to use their initiative, to think for themselves. This was all well and good in theory. It's how you train the best of the best. But it also introduced an element of risk. His methods were sometimes confusing to his subordinates. They weren't always sure what he wanted them to do. Was he testing their obedience or their independent thought? This ambiguity would soon have devastating consequences. On June 22, 1893, the Mediterranean Squadron was steaming in the calm waters off the coast of Tripoli, in what is now Lebanon. The sun was shining, and the sea was as flat as a mill pond. It was a perfect day for naval exercises. Admiral Tryon had his fleet of 11 warships sailing in 2 parallel columns. He was in HMS Victoria, leading one column. His second-in-command, Rear Admiral Albert Marco, was in HMS Camperdown, leading the other. The ships were sailing along, a picture of naval precision and power. But inside Admiral Tryon's mind, a plan was forming. It was a plan for a maneuver that was bold, dramatic, and, as it turned out, fatally flawed. As the afternoon wore on, Admiral Tryon decided it was time for his big finale. He wanted to anchor the fleet for the night, but he didn't want to do it the simple way. He planned a spectacular turn. He ordered the 2 columns of ships, which were sailing parallel to each other, to turn 180 degrees inwards, towards each other. The idea was that they would then sail back in the opposite direction, between the paths they had just traveled. It was a showy move, designed to look impressive. The 2 lines of mighty battleships would wheel around like a pair of dancers, a perfectly synchronized performance of naval might. It was the sort of thing that would look brilliant if it worked. The problem was a simple one of maths and physics. The 2 columns of ships were only 1,200 yards apart. That's about 1.1 kilometers. For a ship the size of HMS Victoria or HMS Camperdown to turn 180 degrees, it needed a lot of space. The turning circle of these ships was at least 800 yards each. So, for the 2 lead ships to turn towards each other, they needed a minimum of 1,600 yards of clear water between them. They had only 1,200 yards. It was a mathematical impossibility. A collision wasn't just a risk, it was an absolute certainty. The command was, to put it plainly, a death sentence for his ship. When the signal was raised, the officers on both the Victoria and the Camperdown were horrified. They could all do the sums. They knew it couldn't work. On the Victoria, the ship's commander, Captain Maurice Bourke, tried to question the Admiral. He respectfully pointed out the danger. But Tryon was known for his sharp temper when questioned. He reportedly asked his staff, "What are you all dawdling for?" He was impatient and brushed off their concerns. He was the Admiral, and his orders were to be obeyed. This was the rigid hierarchy of the Royal Navy at work. You did not question your commanding officer.
especially not one as famous and forceful as Sir George Tryon. Over on HMS Camperdown, Rear Admiral Markham was also in a terrible position. He saw the signal and knew it was madness. He hesitated, delaying his acknowledgement of the order. He hoped Tryon would realize his mistake and cancel it, but Tryon would not back down. He sent a follow-up signal, a public rebuke, asking Markham what he was waiting for. Humiliated in front of the entire fleet, Markham felt he had no choice. He had to assume that his superior, the brilliant Admiral Tryon, had some secret plan, some clever trick up his sleeve that he couldn't see. Reluctantly, he gave the order. The Camperdown began its turn, its bow swinging inwards, directly towards HMS Victoria.
The two colossal warships, each weighing over 10,000 tons, steamed towards each other. Onlookers on the other ships in the squadron watched in frozen horror. It was like a nightmare playing out in slow motion. The crews on the Victoria and the Camperdown knew what was coming. They could only brace themselves. The Camperdown, built with a reinforced ram on its bow for just this purpose, plowed directly into the side of HMS Victoria. The sound was immense, a deafening shriek of tearing metal that echoed across the water. The Camperdown's ram sliced deep into the Victoria's hull, about 12 feet below the waterline, creating a massive gash. The damage was catastrophic. Water began flooding into the Victoria at an incredible rate. The ship immediately listed heavily to starboard, the side of the impact. Admiral Tryon, seeing the horror he had unleashed, remained calm on the bridge. His first priority was to save his men. He ordered the ship to be turned towards the shore, hoping to beach it before it sank. But it was too late. The forward compartments were filling up so fast that the bow was being dragged under. The list to starboard became more and more severe. Men were scrambling on the tilting decks, trying to get to safety. Within minutes, the situation became hopeless. The ship's bow dipped beneath the waves, and the stern rose high into the air. The massive bronze propellers, each weighing tons, spun uselessly in the sunshine. The ship was going down. On the bridge, Admiral Tryon was last seen standing, not trying to save himself. According to survivors, his final words, spoken to his commander, were, "It is all my fault." Just 13 minutes after the collision, HMS Victoria capsized and sank. It went down so fast that it created a huge vortex, pulling men and debris down with it. The ship's boilers might have exploded as the cold seawater hit them, adding to the chaos. The disaster was immense. Of the 715 men on board HMS Victoria, 358 lost their lives. Admiral Tryon was among them, going down with his ship. The other vessels in the squadron launched their boats immediately, pulling shocked and oil-covered survivors from the sea. But for hundreds of sailors, it was too late. They were either trapped inside the sinking battleship or dragged under by the suction. The pride of the Royal Navy lay at the bottom of the Mediterranean. It was a national tragedy, a moment of profound shock for the British public. How could this have happened? How could one of the most powerful navies in the world lose its flagship on a calm, sunny day with no enemy in sight? Now, this is where the story takes a very strange turn indeed. While the tragedy was unfolding under the hot Mediterranean sun, something peculiar was happening back in London. It was the same afternoon, June 22nd, 1893. The Admiral's wife, Lady Tryon, was hosting a large party at their home in Eaton Square. This was a very fashionable part of London, the sort of place where high society gathered. The house was full of guests, the great and the good of the city. There was music, conversation, and laughter. It was a typical, elegant London afternoon at home social event. Lady Tryon was, of course, completely unaware of the disaster that had just befallen her husband. Suddenly, the mood of the party changed. The drawing room doors opened, and a figure appeared. It was a man in the full dress uniform of a vice admiral. He walked slowly and deliberately through the crowded room. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't even seem to notice the dozens of guests who were staring at him. He walked straight across the room, his face described as pale and melancholic, with a very sad expression. The guests were stunned into silence. They watched as the figure reached the other side of the room, passed through another set of doors, and vanished. The whole incident lasted only a minute or two. The guests were baffled. Many of them recognized the figure as Admiral Tyron himself. But why was he here? He was supposed to be thousands of miles away in the Mediterranean. And why was he acting so strangely? He walked through his own party without acknowledging his wife or any of his friends. It was incredibly odd behavior. Lady Tyron, who had also seen the figure, was confused and perhaps a little embarrassed by her husband's apparent rudeness. She tried to make light of it, suggesting he must have returned to London unexpectedly and was playing some sort of joke. But the atmosphere of the party was ruined. People began to whisper amongst themselves. What had they just seen? It was so vivid, so real. Several guests claimed to have seen him clearly. They described his uniform, his posture, and the deep sadness on his face. They checked the other rooms, but there was no sign of the Admiral. He had simply disappeared. At the time, they had no way of knowing that at almost the exact same moment they saw this strange apparition, the real Admiral Tyron was sinking to the bottom of the sea, his last moments filled with the knowledge of his terrible mistake. In 1893, news didn't travel at the speed of light like it does today. There was no internet, no 24-hour news channels. The first reports of the sinking of HMS Victoria took time to reach London via telegraph. It wasn't until the next day, June 23rd, that the terrible news was confirmed. The city was stunned. The newspapers, with their stark headlines, announced the loss of the great ship and the death of Admiral Tyron. For the guests who had been at Lady Tryon's party, this news came with a chilling revelation. The time of the sinking, when adjusted for the time difference between London and the eastern Mediterranean, matched almost perfectly with the time they had seen the Admiral's figure walk through the drawing room. The story spread like wildfire through London's high society. It was the talk of every dinner party and club. The idea that Admiral Tryon's ghost, or wraith, had appeared at his own home at the moment of his death was just sensational. It combined a national tragedy with a supernatural mystery. Newspapers were quick to pick up on it. Early reports were often hushed and respectful, focusing on the grief of Lady Tyron. But the ghostly angle was too good to ignore. Journalists began to interview the guests who had been at the party, and their accounts were printed for a fascinated public to read. Many people were utterly convinced. This was the Victorian era, a time of great interest in spiritualism and the paranormal. Seances were popular, and many educated people believed it was possible to communicate with the dead. For them, the Admiral's appearance was a classic example of a crisis apparition, the spirit of a person appearing to loved ones at the moment of their death. They saw it as proof of an afterlife and a spiritual connection that transcended distance. The story was told as a factual, albeit spooky event, a testament to the Admiral's final silent farewell to his wife. However, not everyone was so quick to believe. There was a strong strain of scientific rationalism in Victorian society too. Skeptics immediately began to question the story. They suggested that the accounts were exaggerated. Perhaps only one or two people had seen something, and the story had grown in the telling. They pointed out that memory is a funny thing. After hearing the tragic news, could the guests' minds have played tricks on them? Maybe they had simply imagined it all, their grief and shock creating a shared illusion. The debate raged. Was this a genuine message from beyond the grave, or a case of mass hysteria? As the debate continued, those who doubted the ghost story began looking for more down-to-earth explanations. One of the most popular theories was that of mistaken identity. Could the guests have seen someone else? Perhaps a different guest, who bore a passing resemblance to Admiral Tyron, had walked through the room. In a crowded party, with people chatting and distracted, it was certainly possible. Maybe it was a footman or another naval officer. Once the seed of the idea was planted and combined with the shocking news of Tyron's death, This simple mistake could have quickly morphed into a ghost story. It's an easy mistake to make. Another possibility raised by skeptics was that the whole story was simply invented after the fact. Perhaps no one saw anything at the party at all. The theory goes that after the news of the sinking arrived, someone, perhaps seeking attention or caught up in the drama of the moment, claimed to have seen the Admiral's ghost. Then, others at the party, not wanting to be left out or genuinely misremembering the events, agreed with them. This is something called collective memory, where a group of people unconsciously construct a shared memory of an event that didn't actually happen. It's a well-known psychological phenomenon. However, the believers had strong counter-arguments. They insisted that multiple, reliable witnesses had seen the figure. These weren't just impressionable folk. They were well-respected members of society, aristocrats, military men, and their wives. They all described the same thing: the Admiral's uniform, his sad expression, his deliberate walk. They were adamant that it was not a case of mistaken identity. They knew Admiral Tyron well, and they were certain it was him. Furthermore, the timing was just too perfect. The idea that they could have collectively imagined something at the exact moment of his death seemed, to them, a greater stretch of the imagination than believing in a ghost. The family themselves, especially Lady Tyron, were very private about the matter. She was a widow in deep mourning, and the public speculation about her husband's ghost must have been incredibly difficult. While she never publicly endorsed the ghost story, she also never publicly denied it. This silence was interpreted differently by both sides. The believers saw it as quiet confirmation, a private grief too sacred to share. The skeptics saw it as a dignified refusal to engage with what they considered to be a silly, sensationalist rumor. The truth, it seemed, remained tantalizingly out of reach, caught between firm belief and rational doubt. As the years passed, the story of Admiral Tyron's ghost began to move out of the newspapers and into the realm of folklore. The immediate shock of the HMS Victoria disaster faded, but the spooky tale attached to it had a life of its own. It was just too good a story to forget. It had all the classic elements: a national hero, a tragic death, a beautiful wife, a high society party, and a ghostly visitation. It was the perfect Victorian ghost story. It began to appear in books about a decade after the event, collected in anthologies of true ghost stories and paranormal encounters. One of the most famous early accounts was in a book by William Stead, a well-known journalist and spiritualist. He included the Tyron case as a prime example of a crisis apparition. These books were very popular. They were the paranormal investigation shows of their day. They presented the story as established fact, often embellishing it a little for dramatic effect. The number of witnesses might grow, the description of the ghost might become more detailed, and the emotional impact on the guests might be heightened. Each retelling cemented the story a little more firmly in the public consciousness. The legend became a staple of naval folklore. For sailors, a superstitious bunch at the best of times, the story was a powerful one. It spoke of a commander's spirit returning to say goodbye, a final act of connection to the life he had left behind. The story was told in mess decks and wardrooms for generations. It served as a cautionary tale about hubris and the terrible cost of a single mistake. But it also added a layer of romantic, Gothic tragedy to the history of the Royal Navy. The Admiral wasn't just a man who made a fatal error. He was a spectral figure, forever linked to his final moments. This process of becoming a legend separated the ghost story from the historical facts of the sinking. The court-martial that followed the disaster had the difficult job of figuring out who was to blame. It ultimately, and perhaps inevitably, placed the blame squarely on the dead Admiral Tyron. But while the official inquiry was about naval procedure and human error, the ghost story offered a different kind of explanation. It was a supernatural one that was more mysterious and, in a way, more satisfying than a simple tale of miscalculation.
The legend provided a mystery that history could not.
So, what do modern historians and researchers make of it all? Today, with over a century of distance, we can look at the evidence a bit more coolly. The problem, as with most ghost stories, is that there is no hard evidence. There are no sworn affidavits from the party guests. There are no diary entries written on the night of June 22, 1893, describing the apparition. All we have are second-hand accounts, newspaper reports, and stories written down years or even decades after the event. This makes it very difficult for a historian to treat the story as a factual event. History needs sources, and the sources here are just too weak. Modern researchers have pointed out several major holes in the story. One of the biggest is the guest list itself. Despite many accounts claiming the party was full of people who saw the ghost, no one has ever been able to produce a definitive list of these supposed witnesses. The names of the people who were there and who claim to have seen the Admiral are conspicuously absent from most tellings of the tale. This lack of named, verifiable witnesses is a huge red flag for any investigator. It suggests the story might have been more rumor than reality, a classic case of a friend saw it. The most likely explanation, from a modern perspective, is the one offered by the skeptics back in the 1890s. A combination of collective delusion and memory distortion. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon. The guests, who were friends of the Tryons, were deeply shocked and saddened by the news. The human brain often tries to make sense of tragedy, to find patterns and meaning. It's entirely plausible that a vague memory of a guest crossing the room, or even just the power of suggestion, was molded by grief into a vivid, shared memory of a ghostly visitation. It's a much more probable explanation than a spirit traveling thousands of miles to walk through a party. Furthermore, the wreck of HMS Victoria was discovered in 2004 by a Lebanese diver. It is in a truly astonishing position, resting vertically on the seabed, its bow buried in the mud and its stern pointing straight up towards the surface. This incredible discovery brought the story of the disaster back into the news. It provided a powerful, physical reminder of the real events of that day. Seeing the ship, a tomb for 358 men, makes the historical tragedy feel very real. In contrast, the ghost story, when examined with modern eyes, seems to fade. It is a story belonging to its time, a product of a Victorian world fascinated by the supernatural. So, after all this, is the story of Admiral Tryon's ghost fact or fiction? The overwhelming verdict of modern history is that it is a fiction. It's a myth, a legend, a fantastic story born from a real-life tragedy. There is no credible evidence to support the claim that a ghostly apparition appeared in Eaton Square that day. The tale is almost certainly the product of grief, rumor, and the Victorian fascination with spiritualism. It's a classic ghost story, but that's all it is. A story. And yet, does that make it any less interesting? I don't think so. In fact, it might make it even more fascinating. The story's appeal lies in what it tells us about the people of the time. It shows us a society grappling with huge changes. They were living in an age of science and industry, building incredible machines like HMS Victoria. But they were also a society that held on to older beliefs in spirits and the supernatural. The Tryon story exists right at that crossroads. It's a story of a technological disaster, a failure of engineering and human judgment that is given a supernatural explanation. It's a way of finding a human, emotional meaning in a cold, mechanical tragedy. It's about a man's spirit, not just a ship sinking. The legend of the Admiral's ghost endures because it's a brilliant piece of storytelling. It has everything you could want: a hero with a fatal flaw, a dramatic death, and a touch of the paranormal. It humanizes an otherwise distant historical event. We don't just remember the technical details of the collision, we remember the image of a sad, spectral admiral making one last visit home. It transforms a naval inquiry report into a campfire tale. It's a story that taps into our deep-seated fascination with life after death, and the idea that strong emotions, like love and regret, can echo beyond the grave.
Ultimately, the ghost of Admiral Tyron continues to haunt our imagination, not because we believe it's real, but because we want it to be. The story of a man who made a terrible mistake is just tragic. But the story of a man whose spirit was so troubled by his mistake that it flew across a continent to say a silent goodbye? That's the stuff of poetry. It's a testament to the power of a good story to outlive the facts and to give a human heart to the cold, hard events of history. And that really is why we are still talking about it more than a century later.